Hello, and thank you for joining us for our EDPA California digital event, Go Live Together with Sue Sung. My name is Steve Riches, and I'll be moderating our session today. When Sue has finished her presentation, she'll be available to answer questions. Please use the raised hand function under Participant tab at the bottom of your screen. But before we get started, our Southern California President, Antonio Nuzzolo, would like to say a few words and introduce you to our board members.
Hi everyone, the boards of EDPA SoCal and NorCal, aka EDPA California, are so grateful to Sue Sung for sharing her time with us today and to all members for joining the conversation. As Steve noted, my name is Antonio Nuzzolo and I'm the president of SoCal's EDPA board. I wanted to briefly introduce to you our board members and then today's speaker. From the SoCal EDPA board, we have on the call Vice President Chris Clark, Secretary Steve Riches. If you want to just wave, there you go. Treasurer Boy Smith and President Emeriti Vince Battaglia and Doug Young. From the NorCal E-board, we have Emma Kristen and Blaze Wheaton as board members. Thank you to all those individuals who helped put together this event. Today's speaker, Sue Sung, has 2 decades of experience in strategy consulting and is now the head of corporate strategy for Freeman. In this role, she works with senior executives to set the strategic direction for the company. She is also responsible for partnering with business leaders to identify, develop, and execute programs to drive performance in support of Freeman's overall goals. Today, Sue is joining us to talk about an important coalition Freeman has launched called Go Live Together. This alliance brings together live events industry leaders to urge local, state, and federal legislators to consider measures for support and recovery through COVID-19. The group is doing very important work, and we are excited to hear Sue tell us more. Take advantage of this precious time with Sue and make note of your questions to be asked after a PowerPoint. With that, I would like to turn it over to Sue Sung to begin her presentation.
Great, thanks, Antonia. Okay. Oh, shoot. I tried to expand my screen. I had everything ready and then I accidentally closed it. So I apologize. You figured it would have an issue at some point in any case. Okay, fantastic. So as Antonia said, we are advocating for the financial relief necessary to sustain the business events ecosystem. Go Live got launched shortly after the CARES Act was passed, and understanding that there was a lot of focus and energy within our industry in helping our businesses and employees take advantage of the CARES Act, Freeman thought about where could we really focus and lend our efforts and support to help drive positive action going forward, and decided that the federal advocacy, knowing that it was going to be a long recovery time, was really an area where we could make a meaningful impact. So with that, in order to achieve our goal, we have to focus on we found that we had to focus on 4 key areas. Ultimately, we want to get effective legislation passed that will help our industry, and I'll go through what our legislative asks are a little bit later in the presentation. But in order to make a compelling argument to the legislators, we had to do a few things. One is really around, bringing awareness to our industry. A lot of our business is behind the scenes, and that's by design. And I can't tell you how many conversations I've had where people are like, oh, I didn't realize you did that. Or realize those kinds of businesses, if you think about the breadth of businesses that make up the events industry, everything from florists to riggers to designers to general services contractors to hotels to ground transportation, we have a lot of businesses that are touched by live events. And then on the exhibitors and attendees themselves, we represent every major sector that make up the US GDP. So it's really important to get legislators to understand the breadth and depth of live events and how we can really help propel the economic recovery that's going to be so needed when markets start to open up, which also goes into our impact again, to quantify some of those, the impacts that we've had from the industry. And then a key area is around health and safety. This is especially impactful for state and local legislative efforts, which are really around helping governors. So Governor Newsom, for example, in California, in setting their reopening plans, thinking about the phasing, thinking about their criteria on how an industry can move between phases, and also helping to convey just the lengths to which those in our industry are really working to ensure participant health, because we have the same goals as the governors do. We want to be able to reopen safely, and we've spent a lot of time and we've made investments to really work with scientists and medical experts to ensure that we're following CDC guidance, and we're really doing everything within our power to ensure safety for participants when we're allowed to reopen. So we launched the website and we launched the coalition with about 80 founding members. We are now well over 1,400 total partners. This represents tens of thousands of companies. We have every major industry association included in the coalition. And so, I think it's really important, and we're looking to use the power of our diverse representation, if you take a look at all the different kinds of businesses, really to affect as we think about going after our legislative goals and priorities. Safety, as I said earlier, two things that we're really focused on. One is helping officials understand that business events are really controlled gatherings. They're not mass gatherings. If you think about the average convention center, you take a space that's 300,000 square feet. And if we looked at the maximum capacity, so 250 people, that's 34 feet between each person, as opposed to the 6 feet guidance that the CDC is, recommending. So we really need to highlight that for them so that they understand that, they shouldn't be going by the numbers, but be looking more at density. We clearly have incentives to self-police. So unlike, a festival or a concert or a leisure activity, attendees and exhibitors, all the participants in a live event is there for a purpose, for usually a business purpose, but it can also, in the case of a nonprofit association, it's an annual meeting. So we have incentives to make sure that we are all staying compliant, because we're all dependent on each other and on the show to be successful. We have the ability to do crowd control, and we have the ability to distance by design. And what do I mean by both of those? Unlike some of these other venues, like an office space or a restaurant, or even a theater that has, fixed fixtures, whether it's furniture, whether or not it's seating, the typical event goes on in a meeting room or a convention center that can be designed from scratch for that particular event. So we can definitely optimize to control the crowd flow as well as the number of people in that event. So I think we have, we've demonstrated that we have a lot of levers at our disposal, that, this isn't a mass gathering, which suggests just hordes of people showing up, that are doing whatever they feel like, or, potentially just not complying with social distancing guidelines. But, our environments are very, very different from that situation. The other thing that we're trying to do is really helping them understand that we are being voluntarily compliant with CDC and OSHA guidance, as well as the WHO. The coalition is in close contact. While we're focused on the US, we're in close contact with our partners in Asia and Europe, and aligning around language and learning best practices and sharing best practices with one another. And so they really, as you see here, there's a lot of tools at our disposal to ensure safety, everything from planning and making sure, we have a communications plan, and we're working with local health officials to reducing contact. A lot of the technology that we have existing already can be used to reduce contact. So think about pre-registration, paperless badges, things along those lines. enhanced cleaning protocols. Many of you are probably familiar with GBAC. A lot of venues, hotels, airlines have adopted the standard. Density management, I talked about before, signage and communication, making it easy for attendees and exhibitors to follow the social distancing guidelines, and obviously, you know, the provision of personal protection, masks, gloves, and sanitation. In terms of the impact, you know, together with SEER and with EIC, you know, the good news is we've had a lot of associations doing some really good work for the industry to understand what our impacts are. But, you know, what we really want to show here is, you know, events aren't, a dollar for events is not just helping the events industry. You know, we support and drive ground transportation, restaurants and retails, airlines, hotels. All of that is tied to, if you think about, you know, an event happening at a convention center in Southern California, and the attendees, including the international attendees that can draw to the city, and subsequently the spending of all of those attendees, the impact can be huge. Not to mention, obviously, you know, the 6.6 million jobs that are that rely on live events, and, you know, we're anxious to get every one of them back to work. So from a legislative perspective, our priorities are really around three key areas. One is we are championing incentives to get attendees and exhibitors back to events. We know without attendees and exhibitors, you know, the show cannot go on. So we're really focused on getting the business tax credits to encourage attendees. We're partnering with U.S. Travel in support of their Travel America Act, which includes travel and tourism tax credits, and encourages meeting and business event participation. We also want to provide safeguards to help businesses in the event industry reopen. So two key pieces of legislation that are currently being considered right now by Congress includes PREA, which is the Pandemic Risk Insurance Act. What this means is offering show and event organizers and venues and suppliers who have event cancellation insurance the opportunity to get communicable disease coverage, especially when you take a look at some of these reopening plans and governors being able to shut cities down, or municipal officials being able to shut cities down or shut events down within a matter of days. When you think about everything that goes into setting up an event in advance, especially the small show organizers, if they don't have this kind of coverage, they're done. I mean, they've spent the money and they're not getting it back. So we really, you know, it's going to be critical that we have this support for them on a go-forward basis. We also need support around providing a safe harbor for events that follow proper health guidelines. What does this mean? It's really making sure that, you know, if we do our due diligence and we're doing everything we possibly can to ensure safe reopening, that if someone does end up contracting COVID-19, that we're not exposing our businesses to frivolous lawsuits. You know, we're trying to do it in good faith. We're trying to do our due diligence, and we need to be protected to enable us to do that. And then finally, you know, offsetting the added health and safety expenses necessary. You know, without a viable vaccine, you know, all we can do is to do our best to mitigate and reduce the risks. And so we know there's going to have to be enhanced cleaning. We know there's going to have to be increased use of PPE, and all of that costs money, especially when you think about the venues. And, you know, some of them are thinking about upgrading to UVC filtration systems and, you know, contactless entry, maybe thermal scanners. Or even, you know, taking it down, if you have to provide, if you make masks mandatory, you think about all the employees and the attendees that are working a show, that can add up very quickly to a lot of dollars. And, you know, and also understanding that shows, when they do come back, are likely to come back smaller. So, you know, it's a double whammy on both sides, both from reduced revenue as well as increased expense. So we're hoping that through the legislation that we're proposing and the support of the legislation that's currently out there, that we can do what we can to mitigate, you know, and support our businesses in getting back to work. So in terms of our timeline, you know, we're now starting to enter phase 3 with the planning and mobilization. You know, a lot of folks within the coalition have asked us, well, what can I do to help? And, you know, really it's just signing on to the coalition so that we can keep you informed of what we're doing in case, you know, you have a connection somewhere, or really right now, you know, we're trying to find champions within Congress who can help us plead our case. But as we understand it, you know, nothing substantive is really going to happen before July 20th. And so we're just getting ourselves prepared so that when Congress is ready to consider legislation like ours, we are ready to go and we're ready to mobilize and tap into the power of the coalition. So with that, that wraps up the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions. If you haven't done so already, would encourage you to go check us out at golivetogether.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. If you could, any questions, if you could use the raised hand function, and Sue will answer the questions. So first one we have is Boy. What, you have a question, Boy?
Yes, thank you so much for the presentation. I have a question. How long did it take to go from phase 2 to phase 3, and how long do you expect it to take from phase 3 to 4?
You mean, for the coalition?
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, a lot of it is really dependent on how the mood is shifting in Congress and what kind of legislation they are considering. So unfortunately, I don't have a hard answer for you. Most of the direction that we're getting is getting into phase 4. We're probably talking late summer, early fall, given where Congress is. From phase 1 to phase 2 for us was pretty quick. Phase 2 to 3 has probably been, I would say, just the last couple of weeks, because it's only been the last couple of weeks that we were getting indications that Congress was even ready to consider anything around recovery. So we're really being driven by them and ensuring that we're not wasting activities is the wrong word, but you know, it's all about getting to the right person at the right time, and that's what we're strategizing and focusing our efforts to do right now.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, other questions? Must have some other questions here.
I have a question.
Okay.
Sue, I have 2 questions actually. First, can you tell us what it means to be a partner? And then as a company, and then do you have any plans on working on legislation on the state level, or are you only working at the federal level?
Yeah, so being a partner is super easy. All you have to do is click join us. You know, we try to use, I make the mistake of slipping into members, but we try to use partners because we are not trying to create, this is a coalition, this is temporary. This was a platform we created to be able to communicate widely and quickly across the industry. So we're not trying to set up another association. We don't have aspirations for this to exist after, you know, we've been able to pass this legislation and help the industry turn the corner. So that was the reason for choosing the word partner. As far as state legislation, no. However, I am starting to, so let's see. We are focused on governors, mayors, and local health officials and helping to encourage the reopening plans. So Cal Travel, for example, has I'm sure most of you are familiar with, you know, led a coalition to communicate with Governor Newsom's office and to help him understand that we are prepared to safely reopen and should be considered as such in his reopening plans. As I understand it, they are now mobilizing some state senators and some state assembly people in order to sign on to the letter to help convince, you know, Governor Newsom. So there is some of that activity going on, but you know, we just, to be perfectly honest, we didn't have the resources or the depth to be able to lead that charge in multiple states across the country, but we're absolutely there to support it. So in that situation, like I've reached out to the coalition members who have local lobbyists to see if they have any connections to local legislators in order to support the broader coalition effort.
Great, thank you. David Holloway, you have a question?
I do. Thank you, Sue, for doing this for everyone. The question I had was, in terms of that safe harbor for the events industry, I was actually on a call a little earlier where a bunch of us were discussing what that's going to look like. Some companies are coming out with different waivers to sign, and you'll only travel individuals if they're in place. And other individuals are saying, well, that waiver doesn't really mean anything because there's no law or guidance on that yet. So can you just touch on that a little bit and, you know, just give us your input on what you're hearing?
Yeah, I would say I would definitely recommend reaching out to legal counsel with regards to contract language. I do believe a lot of folks are starting to institute that kind of language. There has not been, as I've seen so far, a formal bill yet introduced in Congress, but about a dozen or so Senate Republicans issued a letter. Mitch McConnell's come out publicly and declared that this is a red line for him. The U.S. Chamber has come out in support of this. U.S. Travel's come out in support of this. There's a lot of industries who really have a vested interest in this. And so I think in the immediate term, it's, you know, definitely work with legal counsel in terms of updating your contracts language. I think in terms of the broader effort, there's too much momentum behind this to suggest that something would not pass at a federal level, would be my guess.
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Somebody must have another question here.
I have one.
Oh,
This
Stacy.
is Stacy. So with the PPP that they put out, and I'm sure that when they put it out, they were hoping that a lot of companies would take advantage of it and then be able to start back into business. Like, you know, like they said, it's a kind of a bridge. Do you think it's going to be a rude awakening for the, you know, Congress next month? Because with our industry, we're not coming back right now. And like with the restaurants, they're all, a lot of them are getting open. What they're gonna find right now at the end of this month, all of us are gonna go back on unemployment. And are they aware of that, or is it gonna be a rude awakening?
No, I think they are aware of it. I don't know to what extent they are aware of it specifically as it relates to our businesses, but just so you know, our lobbyists recently, actually, and I participated in a call with Senator Young's office. So Young Bennett introduced the bipartisan bill called the Restart Program Act, which was designed explicitly to extend and expand PPP. So, so extend the benefits as well as expand it so it's not just an employee retention credit, but it would also cover some fixed costs like utilities, like rent, mortgage, things along those lines. So, you know, that is one bill that we're looking at very closely. The HEROES Act looked to expand some of the PPP provisions while it passed the House. It has not yet passed the Senate. And my understanding is there's still some significant debate going on with regards to the HEROES Act as passed by the House before the Senate will even consider, but there's some opportunities in that as well. So I know they are aware. I think the issue now is hoping that Congress will see it not as a partisan issue, which is how it is shaping up right now, and as a business need issue, you know, when you think about it. There's recent, we had done, actually including EDPA, I had reached out to the associations to get some data because the lobbyists had asked for it. And, you know, the survey results came back and said pretty much everybody who wanted PPE got PPE, or I mean, wanted PPP funding got it. However, 75% said it's not nearly enough. It's not gonna sustain them until business is allowed to resume. So, you know, we're continuing to draw attention to that need because, again, I think what Congress doesn't understand is, to your point, restaurants, you know, they might be crippled, but they can still open. Retail might be crippled, but they can still open. Events, we're done. We're shut down, closed, do not pass go. There's no partial opening in our industry, and we're trying really hard to get the Congress folks to listen.
Yeah, well, I think next month being July and when it all hits, most of it ends. I think that like I said, they're going to find out how many
Yeah.
people will go back on unemployment. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, other questions? James.
Yes,
Zacharias.
Sue, thank you very much. Appreciate that. I apologize for being late. I was detained on a call, but one of the things I think, to Stacy's point in talking about PPP drastically changed when they went from 8 weeks to 24 weeks. There was nearly not enough money to extend past that 8-week mark. But my question really concerns liability and commercial insurance. So I'm hearing a bit of issues coming from the associations, and you can probably speak a little bit more to that, with their commercial insurance and being able to actually hold a show where an insurance company will insure and cover the liability of that show, with COVID-19 being such an issue, which in turn goes back to the liability, the corporate liability issue. So have you guys heard what have you heard? And is there anything from the insurance organizations regarding that aspect?
I can definitely put that down as a follow-up. We have been following insurance, but not from a liability protection perspective. From the event cancellation perspective, what we're hearing is that the insurance companies are not behind a federal backstop. They want the federal government to cover it all. So they are trying to drive for federal funding, because their point of view is, unlike TRIA, which PREA is based off of, which is a terrorism, it created a backstop for terrorist acts. Their argument is a terrorist act is discrete and it's over. A pandemic, you have no idea how long it will last, and therefore it's impossible to put that burden onto insurance companies without causing undue burden. So therefore the federal government needs to step up and fund it. So, that's why, so I can tell you with PREA, everything we're hearing is it likely will be a standalone issue, and it likely won't be taken up by Congress until later in the year. My guess is that the liability issue would be similar, but again, kind of given the importance that Senator McConnell has placed on it, maybe that timeline's a little bit different, and maybe insurance companies, it's an interesting point, because maybe insurance companies are going to be willing to give a little on that if they get a little on the other thing, and vice versa. So I could definitely look into that for you.
Great, thank you. Okay, more questions. Anyone else have something they'd like to ask? Nobody?
I have a question.
Emma? Okay.
Yeah. So the Go Live Together, it's not bound to just the US. And I read that the coalition reaches at least 112 other countries. And so have you guys had any accomplishments or made any headway in any other countries outside of the US that you guys are proud of that you want to talk about?
The 112 countries are through the associations that have US presence that also have presence in other countries. We are focused explicitly in the US. That being said, we have a Go Live Brazil that somebody from Brazil wanted to start. And we have been in close contact with associations in Europe and in Asia. So we're not actually, Go Live is not actually driving any legislative action in other countries. However, and it's posted on the news on the site, we are seeing some success stories coming out of Europe in particular, also Asia, but I think Europe has, they had more infrastructure, and so like in a country like Germany, and they had already an awareness and acknowledgement of the events and trade shows, trade fairs industry over there, that I think they've been able to get some changes affected sooner. So things like in Germany in their reopening plan, getting exhibitions and fairs not excluded like other leisure activities like concerts and festivals. So they were able to get a carve out for the events, working with the federal government in terms of some of the safety guidelines and making sure, and and getting approval and review of the voluntary guidelines that we've come up with, that in their cases, consistent with who's working very closely with CDC, things along those lines. So we are starting to see and sharing language and action.
Great, thank you. Rick, you have a question?
I do. Thanks, Sue, for all the information. My question is the Alliance looking at doing any reaching out to news medias and having true hard discussions through some serious news medias across the country? Just seeing that might be something that would kind of push the envelope to the public opinion.
Absolutely. So Go Live has recently, through the generosity of our funding partners, we have recently engaged a firm to help drive the communications for us. To date, it's been handled, on a voluntary basis through Freeman and others in the coalition who had some resources to spare. The trade media, they're all participants and they're, willing and able to help when we can. We're really relying on our comms resource to give us the narrative arc, share with them what our advocacy asks are, understand where some of the hot spots are, if you will. The good news is we are starting to see ourselves, our industry, represented more often in the national media. So we're hoping to be able to engage and raise our profile in that regard. So a lot of what I've been working on is state and city level impact analysis, right? And even using tools like the events, I can't remember what the I stands for, but the CIC, but it's Destinations International, has the events calculator where you can actually plug in some impacts for an event. And where that becomes important is, so it made local press about IMTS pulling out of, canceling its Chicago show. And, as we start to see cities opening up at different rates across the country, I think it becomes a meaningful story to understand what some of these local municipalities may be giving up in return.
Thank you. Chris, you have a question? Yeah, you need to take your let me unmute you. I can do that.
Sure.
Okay.
Great information today. My question is how your alignment and alliances have gone with CVBs. Have they been in your court?
Yes, absolutely. Something more specific?
Just in general. I mean, having their strength and their lobbying strength, especially to go along with and assist in your efforts in the Go Live.
Absolutely. So there have been some. So again, I've been in close contact with Don Welsh over at Destinations International. There's a handful of CVBs, one in particular, who have their own lobbying efforts that we've been sharing resources and exchanging information on, especially, really activating them more on our state and local reopening plans. So they've been, hugely supportive. Again, Cal Travel included, their coalition included every major convention center and CVB. So Go Live worked with them both in terms of sharing some information. So some letters that we had done in Chicago, we shared with California, just, for them to be able to pull relevant facts that might help them in that regard, and anything we could do to support them in terms of the data that we had. But those guys are great because they have there are sources more so than the other way around. So it's really been across the board in that regard. But yeah, they've been hugely helpful. I will say they and the venues in particular really are giving us the pulse of what is happening at the municipal level. They have information well before anybody else do.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, other questions? Matthew? You need to unmute.
Yeah, I did.
Okay. Okay.
Sorry. I didn't catch the name of the first bill that you said that they were working on about the PPP stuff. Could you say that again, please?
It's called the Restart Program, R-E-S-T-A-R-T. It is an acronym. Don't ask me what it stands for.
Okay.
But it's also known as the Young-Bennett Bill because Senator Young and Senator Bennett are the ones who co-sponsored it.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So we, you know, as EDPA, we've been lobbying as best we can, sending out letters to all the senators and congressmen based on the list that we were given from Exhibition Stay, and more PPP is one of the asks that we've been pressing, and we've been trying to get as many states involved as we can, and we have been getting some responses. We have been asking about the insurance liability, the PPP, and the tax stuff that you guys are all working on. So just know that EDPA, you know, as a group, we're behind all this stuff. So, and we appreciate the stuff that you guys are doing. So
fantastic, thank you. Yeah, in the last update newsletter last week's, I have a link to the Restart Program, but if we can take it offline, I'm happy to share. I can share the legislation with you.
Thank you. Okay, other questions? Anyone else have any other questions? No? Oh, Vince.
Yeah, Sue, thank you very much for the information. Regarding the openings of the industry, we've talked a little bit about it, how there's going to be no part-time opening, or, you know, we're just all closed. You also mentioned that some cities were going to open at different points than other cities. Do you have any projections or forecasts of when we might be able to start opening? Is it going to be a soft opening, or small shows going to open first? Which, like Orlando is planning to open a show here in a week or two. I just want to know what you have in your forecast and your information.
Yeah, I think that's the million-dollar question that everyone is asking. If you go to the Go Live site under Resources COVID-19, we do have a link to U.S. Chamber posts every state's reopening plan and dates that they keep updated. So that seemed to be the easiest tool. There are several tools out there that are doing it, and we're even actually manually compiling a list of the schedules posted on all the convention centers. I mean, unfortunately, the answer is we just don't know. We do believe, so here's a few things. I think nothing's gonna happen in the summer. It seems to be the consensus, or very little will happen in the summer. The southern states seem to be more open than the northern states, and they seem to be more flexible. You know, we've got a challenge in, you know, so the governor of Georgia came out and said, okay, come July 1, you can have conventions again. All I need you to do is follow these 21 steps and boom, you can do it. And then we have the convention center operators saying, yeah, we're not gonna have an event before October. So, you know, and because also they can't get the attendees to the events. And so, you just have so many dynamics that are going on. You know, I think folks are still hopeful for the fall. I think, you know, chances are they are still going to be smaller events. I think, you know, despite what we're saying and the lengths to which we are going to ensure participant safety as an industry, I think there's just a comfort level of doing things in a smaller basis. Oh, and then on top of that, you know, there's rumors, although I just heard that this was, it's not getting any traction, but it made the news that, you know, they were going to turn McCormick Place into schools in the fall. So, you know, when you have so much in play, it becomes very difficult to say with any certainty. But I think folks are still planning for the fall. I think people are keeping a watchful eye for the winter shows. I think we are looking more at smaller regional events being allowed to open, because those reduce some of the variables, right? You have less people who have to travel. You don't have to deal with international. You may or may not have to you know, deal with only one type of transit. So cars and trains potentially instead of planes and buses and cars. You know, so that's really kind of, I think, a lot of the drivers for the more smaller regional shows, as much as the health and safety piece of it.
Got it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, other questions? Don't see any raised hands. Okay, if we don't have any other questions, thank you very much, Sue. It was a great presentation. I'm sure I learned a lot from it. I'm sure everyone else. And just wanted to let everyone know in a couple of weeks, we're going to be doing another one of our happy hour meetings. It's going to be 2 Thursdays from now. And then next month, we're going to be having another speaker as well. So we'll keep you guys updated with everything that's going on with that. So
Awesome.
thanks, everyone. And do you want to say anything, Antonia?
Yes, I actually had one last question, a closing question. Sue, what can we do as individuals to support the Go Live Together mission?
Yeah, and I get asked that a lot, and I don't think I have a great answer. All I can say is please join us, because that is the best way for us to communicate with you. And so we will be calling on you to activate the power of this coalition. And so, you know, when the time is right, I think there's just, when I've sent out the all calls before, the response has been overwhelming. This industry, it's just what makes this industry so great. Just the level of support and enthusiasm and willingness to pitch in and do whatever it takes has just been tremendous. And that's what we're trying to convey to legislators. I mean, there's just on so many levels why we, you know, why we need the help so desperately. And in any case, so I would say just join us. I mean, it sounds very simple, but that's just that's the best way for us to be able to communicate to you when we do need something. So
wonderful. Okay, thank you so much, Sue, for your presentation today and for all the work that you're doing to help out our industry during these tough times.